Most people see a man like Cole Duval standing in a checkout line at a grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, and they give him a wide berth without fully knowing why. They see the cut, the patches, the bottom rocker, the Iron Cross MC emblem stitched in red thread on black leather. They see the arms. They see the way he stands, which is the way of a man who has not once in 30 years considered that he might be the least threatening person in a given room. They see trouble. They see someone to step around. They see the last thing they expected to encounter between the cereal aisle and the register. They move their carts. They find a different lane. They look at their phones. Nobody in the Hartwell family grocery on Mill Street in Caldwell, Georgia, on a cold Tuesday in February, paid attention to what Cole Duval was actually doing in Lane 4. He was waiting. He was holding a basket with 6 items in it: a pound of ground beef, a can of kidney beans, 2 cans of diced tomatoes, a box of cornbread mix, and a small bottle of the hot sauce that only Hartwell stocked because it came from a woman named Delphine who made it in small batches in her kitchen on Redbud Road and sold it through the store on a handshake arrangement she'd had with the previous owner for 16 years. He made chili on Tuesday nights. He had made chili on Tuesday nights since 2009. It was not something he thought about or spoke about. It was just what he did on Tuesdays. He was not looking for anything that afternoon. He was not expecting anything. He was 4 customers back from the register, reading the label on the hot sauce because there was nothing else to read, when the manager came out of the back. What happened in the next 22 minutes would be something that the other customers in Lane 4 and Lanes 3 and 5 would talk about for the rest of the week. And what they would say, every single one of them, was that the moment they remembered most was not the loudest part. It was the moment just before, when the big man in the corner put the hot sauce down on the conveyor belt very carefully and looked up. Hartwell Family Grocery had been on Mill Street for 31 years, which was long enough that most of Caldwell had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the furniture in a room you've lived in too long. It occupied the corner of Mill and Decatur in a building that had been a hardware store before it was a grocery. And the bones of the hardware store were still present if you looked. The wide plank floors that had been lacquered over twice but not replaced. The old tin ceiling painted white. The loading dock out back that faced Decatur Street and caught the afternoon wind in a way that made the stock boys move faster in winter. Inside, the store had the particular atmosphere of a small-town grocery that has been owned by the same family long enough to reflect their character. Not aggressively organized, not loud, not striving toward any aesthetic, just functional and comfortable and stocked with the things that Caldwell's people needed, in the arrangement that made sense to the people who worked there. The produce section was near the front. The deli counter ran along the back wall. The checkout lanes, 6 of them, though only 3 were ever open at once, faced the wide front windows that let in the flat winter light of the afternoon. The cold had come down from the north 2 days earlier and settled over Caldwell the way cold settles in Georgia. Not with the drama of snow, but with a gray low sky and a damp wind that went through a jacket instead of around it. The parking lot held maybe 40 cars at 2 in the afternoon, which was a typical Tuesday. The lunch crowd was gone. The after-school rush had not arrived. The store existed for an hour or 2 in the gentler pace of its weekday middle. Cole Duval had parked his road glide near the cart return because he always parked near the cart return, which was a habit born of having watched too many parking lots produce situations that started with a door ding and accelerated. He was 48 years old, 6'1", 235 pounds, of a man who had been chapter president of the Iron Cross MC for 7 years and had, before that, spent 11 years earning the kind of credibility in the chapter that president was the natural outcome of. He had a shaved head and a full beard, dark going gray, and his hands were the hands of a man who had built things with them. Wide palms, thick knuckles. A scar across the back of the right one from an engine mount that had given way in 2014. He was not in a hurry. He was never in a hurry on Tuesdays. He had taken the afternoon for himself because Tuesday afternoons, since his wife Karen had moved to Savannah to be near the grandchildren 18 months ago, were the afternoons he felt most acutely that the house was a different size than it used to be. The chili was not complicated. It had never been complicated. It was the specific thing he could do on a Tuesday afternoon that turned the kitchen back into a room with a purpose. He got in line behind a woman with a full cart, and a man with a case of water and a teenager who was buying what appeared to be only a bag of chips and was on his phone. And Cole Duval stood at the back of lane 4 and read the hot sauce label and waited without impatience, because impatience was a posture he had not found much use for. He had not yet looked at the cashier in lane 4. He had not yet looked at her at all. If you're new here, subscribe now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see where this story lands. Drop your city, your state, anywhere in the world you're watching from. I read every one. Now, back to lane 4, because the woman at that register had been standing on the same tile floor for 22 years, and what was about to walk through that staff door behind her was something she had been dreading for 3 months and hadn't told a soul about. Her name was Dorothy Faye Cutter. She was 71 years old. She had been a cashier at Hartwell Family Grocery for 22 years, which meant she had outlasted 2 ownership changes, 4 store remodels, and the specific indignity of learning a new point-of-sale system 3 separate times without complaint. She had been married to a man named Harold Cutter for 44 years, until Harold went to Piedmont Hospital in 2019 for a bypass that should have been routine and never came home. She had 2 grown children, a daughter in Memphis and a son in Charlotte, and 4 grandchildren she visited every other month and thought about every single day. She was small in the way that some women become small over decades, not reduced exactly, but compressed, the way a thing becomes denser when its volume decreases. She was 5'2" and wore the store's blue uniform vest over a white turtleneck because the registers were near the front doors, and the doors opened and the cold came in. She wore her silver hair pinned up. She wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore, on her left hand, the ring Harold had given her 44 years ago, a thin gold band with a small diamond that she had taken off exactly once to have it cleaned, and had put back the same day. She had learned, over 22 years, every regular customer's name and their habits, and the names of their children and the names of their dogs, and the particular quality of small conversation that a cashier and a customer develop when they have seen each other every week for 2 decades. She remembered birthdays. She asked after surgeries. She knew which customers preferred a bag packed light and which preferred it packed full. And she adjusted without being asked, because she believed, had always believed, in the specific way of people who were raised to, that taking care of people in the small ways was not optional and did not require gratitude. Her revealing small detail was this: she kept a tin of buttermints in the pocket of her vest. She had kept buttermints in her pocket for 22 years, because small children sometimes came through her line in the state that small children sometimes arrived in. Overwrought, overwhelmed, the particular desolation of a child who has been in a grocery store too long, and she had found, early on, that a buttermint offered with a specific gravity, as though the giving of it were a small and important ceremony, was almost always sufficient to change the weather of a small person's face. She did not think of this as remarkable. It was just what you did. She had been at Hartwell's for 6 months under the previous manager, a woman named Pat Simmons, who had run the store with the efficient warmth of someone who understood that a grocery store is not just a building, but a part of a community's daily texture. Pat had retired in November. The new manager had started the first week of December. His name was Kyle Reeder. He was 34 years old. He had come from a regional chain store in Augusta, where he had managed a floor staff of 40 and had metrics, and he talked about those metrics, and he had spreadsheets about those metrics. And he had arrived at Hartwell's with the specific energy of a man who has been told he is being given an opportunity to improve something, and has not yet considered that the something might not need improving in the way he intends. He had begun, in his first week, by changing the bag packing procedure. In his second week, he revised the break schedule. In his third week, he posted the new customer service standards on the staff bulletin board in the break room, laminated, with a note that said these were not suggestions. Dorothy had read the list. She had read the part that said cashiers were to minimize personal conversation with customers and focus on transaction efficiency. She had read it twice. She had said nothing. She had continued to remember the names. She had continued to ask after the surgeries. She had continued to give the buttermints to the small children because there was no policy specific enough to stop her from doing that, and she would require one before she did. But Kyle Reeder had been watching. And for 3 months, Dorothy Faye Cutter had felt that watching, and had known what was building, and had not spoken of it to anyone, and had kept coming in every morning and doing her job with the full precision of a woman who intends to give no one anything to point at. She was midway through a transaction. The woman with the full cart, who was named Glenda Marsh, and who Dorothy had known for 9 years, when the door to the back staff corridor opened. Kyle Reeder came out at 2:41 in the afternoon. He was not a large man. He was average height, average build, dressed in a button-down shirt and the store's manager lanyard, and the particular posture of a man who has concluded that his institutional authority is a physical attribute, something he wears and carries and deploys, and that this posture is received by others the way he intends it. He had a tablet in one hand. He held it the way some men hold clipboards, not to read from it, but to signal that he has already read from it, and drawn conclusions, and arrived here with the evidence. He walked to lane 4. He did not wait for Dorothy to finish the transaction. He did not look at Glenda Marsh, who was mid-swipe on her card. He stepped to the side of the register and said, in a voice that was not shouting, "Not yet, but that had the quality of something about to be, Dorothy, I need a word." Dorothy said, "I'm with a customer." He said, "I need a word now." Glenda Marsh looked at him. She looked at Dorothy. She picked up her bags. Kyle Reeder waited until Glenda had taken 2 steps toward the door, and then he turned to Dorothy and he said, loud enough for lane 3 and lane 5 to hear clearly, "You've got 14 items scanned wrong in the last 2 weeks. 14. Do you understand how that looks on a report?" Dorothy said, "I can review those transactions. I've already reviewed them," he said. "What I need you to understand is that this is not acceptable. I have explained the new scanning protocol to this team 3 times. And I have one cashier who continues to." "Kyle," Dorothy said quietly, "to operate as though these standards don't apply to her because she's been here a long time." "Kyle." Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. He raised his voice. It was not red in the face, not yet. But his voice went up the way voices go up when a person has decided that volume is a form of authority and has stopped distinguishing between the two. He said, "This is a performance issue. I have it documented. If you cannot meet the expectations of this position, then I have to have a different conversation with you, and I'd rather have it now than... The checkout lane went silent. Lane 3 went silent. Lane 5 went silent. A woman pushing a cart past the end of the checkout area stopped pushing. Dorothy Faye Cutter stood at her register with her hands flat on the counter in front of her, and her eyes forward, and her chin up. And she was trembling, not violently. Not in a way that a stranger might immediately notice, but in the small, specific way of a person who is holding something very large, very still. She did not speak. 8 people were watching. 8 people were watching, and nobody said a word. Nobody except the man in lane 4, who set the hot sauce bottle down on the conveyor belt, very carefully, and looked up. Cole Duvall had been 4 customers back when Reader came out of the staff corridor. He had moved to 2 customers back. He was now the next in line. He had watched all of it. He had watched with the still attention of a man who sees the full shape of a situation before he decides what to do about it, and who does not make that decision until he is certain he has the full shape. He had the full shape. He set the basket down on the conveyor belt beside the hot sauce. He straightened. He was 6'1", and he took up the specific amount of space that 6'1" and 235 pounds takes up when the person inside it has decided to stop being background. He walked around the end of the conveyor belt. He did not rush. He walked the way a man walks when the distance is short and the time is sufficient, and there is no version of what happens next in which rushing is an advantage. He came to the front of lane 4, and he stopped 6 feet from Kyle Reader, and he stood there. Reader turned. He looked at Cole Duvall. He looked at the cut. He looked at the patches. He looked at the size of the man's hands. He said, "Sir, this is a staff matter." Cole said, "I know." 2 words. The register hum was the loudest sound in the store. Reader said, "I'm going to have to ask you to." "I heard what you said to her," Cole said. Reader adjusted his grip on the tablet. His posture recalculated. The authority is posture recalibrating the way a machine recalibrates when a variable changes and the prior output no longer applies. He said, "This is an employee performance issue, and it's not in front of customers," Cole said. "In front of customers, and you raised your voice." Reader's face was doing something now. Not quite red, not quite afraid. The complex intermediate state of a man whose confidence is institutional and who is encountering something his institution does not cover. He said, "I don't know who you are, but..." Cole looked at Dorothy. Dorothy had turned from the register. She was looking at him. Her hands were still on the counter. Her chin was still up. And something was moving in her face, not recognition, not yet. Something more like the face of a person who is watching a thing unfold that they cannot yet name, but can feel the shape of. Cole said, "Dorothy." She looked at him. She looked at his face. She said, "Cole?" He said, "Hey, Aunt Dorothy." The checkout lane went so quiet that the refrigeration units in the back of the store were audible. Dorothy Faye Cutter looked at Cole Duvall. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone they know in a context that has rearranged itself. The specific cognitive reassembly of a person placing a face from one room into a completely different room and having to wait a half second for the 2 images to resolve. She said, "You look like your father." He said, "So I've been told." 8 customers. 8 customers in lanes 3, 4, and 5, and none of them moved. The woman who had stopped pushing her cart was still stopped. Glenda Marsh, who had only made it to the end of the checkout area, was still there, bags in hand, not going anywhere. Kyle Reader looked at the exchange. He looked at Cole. He looked at Dorothy. He was running a calculation, and the calculation was producing a result he did not like, and he had not finished accepting it. He said, in a voice that had come down several notches, "I wasn't aware you knew." Cole turned and looked at him. He did not say anything. He just looked at him, and the looking had a specific quality, not threatening, not hostile, but the quality of a man who has made a complete assessment of something and is now deciding what to do with it. He said, "Step back here with me." It was not a question. Reader looked at the tablet. He looked at Cole. He took 2 steps back, away from the register, away from Dorothy, into the small space at the end of the lane. Cole followed him. He stopped. He spoke at a volume that Dorothy could not fully hear, which was intentional, and which the customers in the adjacent lanes could not fully hear, which was also intentional. He spoke for approximately 90 seconds. Reader's face went through 4 distinct phases in 90 seconds. The first was the defensive posture of a man who is being told something he disputes. The second was the recalculation of a man who is receiving information that changes the strategic picture. The third was the expression of a man who has realized he is in a room that is larger than he thought, with walls closer than he'd assumed. The fourth was the expression of a man who has decided that the correct move is stillness and compliance and the very rapid internal revision of his prior position. Cole finished. He stepped back. Reader did not speak. Cole looked at him for one more moment. Then he turned and went back to lane 4. He stood at the end of the belt. He looked at Dorothy. She said, "You don't have to," he said. "I know." He went back to his place in line. He picked up the hot sauce. He waited. Nobody in that store knew yet what Cole Duval had said to Kyle Reader in those 90 seconds. Not Dorothy. Not the customers in the adjacent lanes, not the stock boy near the end cap who had stopped stocking to watch. They knew what they had seen, which was a large man in a leather cut speak quietly to a manager whose voice had been raised, and the manager going still, and the manager saying nothing. What Cole had said was this. He had said that he was Dorothy Cutter's nephew. He had said that he was chapter president of the Iron Cross MC, which had 217 members in 3 counties, and that those members included, among others, 3 Caldwell County deputies, 2 men who sat on the city council, a man who owned the building that housed the regional office of Hartwell's parent company, and the lawyer who had handled the estate of the family that had founded Hartwell Family Grocery. He had said none of this loudly, or with any particular emphasis. He had said it the way a man states facts that are simply facts, not threats, not performances, just information that he believed Kyle Reader would benefit from having. He had said one more thing. He had said that Dorothy Faye Cutter had worked in this store for 22 years, and had never once, in 22 years, had a complaint filed against her by a customer, and that if Kyle Reader felt that 14 scanning discrepancies over 2 weeks constituted a performance issue that warranted being addressed in front of a checkout lane full of customers, Cole would be happy to make some calls and share that perspective with people who were in a position to weigh it against their own. He had said, "Do we understand each other?" Reader had said yes. Cole paid for his groceries. Dorothy rang him through herself, she had insisted, waving off the young cashier from lane 3 who had drifted over in the general instinct that someone else might be needed. Her hands were steady now. They had steadied sometime in the last 5 minutes, with the particular steadiness of a person who has set something down that they have been holding up alone for a long time. She scanned the kidney beans. She scanned the diced tomatoes. She scanned the cornbread mix and said, without looking up, "You still make your mama's chili recipe?" Cole said, "I do," she said. "She used to add a spoonful of peanut butter." He said, "I know. I left that part out for about 12 years before I admitted it was better with it." Dorothy looked up. She looked at him. A smile crossed her face, brief, real. The smile of a woman who has not smiled at a checkout register in approximately 3 months and has missed it. She said, "I didn't know you were in town." He said, "I'm usually around Tuesdays." She said, "You should have said something." He said, "I'm saying it now." She bagged his items. She had the cornbread mix, the hot sauce, the cans of tomato. She packed the bag the way she packed every bag. Not too heavy, the cans on the bottom, the cornbread mix flat on top so the corners didn't tear. She handed it to him. He paid. He took the bag. He said, "You call me if anything changes." She said, "Cole?" He said, "You call me." She looked at him. She said, "All right." He nodded. He picked up his bag. He walked through the front doors and out into the cold February afternoon. From outside, the sound arrived before anyone inside had finished processing what had just happened. It was low at first, the kind of sound that registers in the chest before it resolves into something identifiable. A rumble that was not traffic, not weather, not any of the sounds that Mill Street produced on a Tuesday afternoon. It built from the direction of Decatur Street, and it built the way sound builds when there is a lot of it and it is moving toward you, deepening, spreading, filling the air the way water fills a vessel. Dorothy was still at her register. The other cashiers were at their registers. Kyle Reeder had gone back through the staff door, but had not gone far enough to not hear. The sound filled the parking lot. Engines, dozens of them, cutting off one by one in the unison of people who have done this enough times that the individual decisions produce a collective rhythm, until the last engine died and the February air outside Hartwell Family Grocery on Mill Street went absolutely silent. Dorothy walked to the front window. The parking lot held 63 motorcycles. She counted later. She could not have said why she counted, only that she did, and the number was 63. They were parked in 2 long lines that ran from the cart return to the far edge of the lot, chrome and leather under the flat winter sky, and the men beside them were standing with the particular stillness of people who are present and intend to remain present and require nothing further from the situation in order to be those things. Cole Duvall was standing at the front of the line. He had his arms crossed. He was not looking at the store. He was looking at the road, the way a man looks at the road when he is somewhere he intends to be. Glenda Marsh was still in the parking lot. She had not gotten to her car. She was standing beside her cart with her hand on the handle, looking at 63 motorcycles in the Hartwell's parking lot, and her face had the specific expression of someone watching something they will describe to their family at dinner tonight and not be fully believed. Kyle Reeder came out through the front doors. He stood on the mat. He looked at the parking lot. He looked at the formation. He looked at Cole at the front of it, arms crossed, not moving. He stood there for a long time. He went back inside. He went directly to the break room. He took down the laminated customer service standards from the bulletin board. He held them for a moment. He put them in the recycling bin. Nobody saw him do this. He did not intend for anyone to see it. He did it because there are moments when a man is alone with a version of himself that does not have an audience. And in those moments, something either changes or it doesn't. And this was a moment when something changed. Whether it held was a different question. But it changed. Dorothy Faye Cutter stood at the front window of Hartwell Family Grocery and looked at 63 motorcycles in the parking lot and did not move for a long time. The woman from Lane 3 came and stood beside her. Her name was Angela. She was 24, had worked the register for 8 months, had been standing close enough to hear everything. She said, "Is that your family?" Dorothy looked at the parking lot. She looked at Cole at the front of the line, at the men on either side of him, at the formation that stretched the length of the lot in the cold, still air. She thought about Cole's mother, her sister Ruth, who had been gone for 6 years now. She thought about Sunday dinners at Ruth's house on Sycamore Street, which had been the house that all of them came to, which had been the house that smelled of cornbread and chili on Sunday afternoons in winter, which had held all of them together across decades in the way that only certain houses do, and the loss of which had been, among other losses, one of the things that made the house she went home to each night feel more silent than it used to. She thought about a nephew she had not called in 3 months because she had not wanted to worry him. She said, "Yes." Angela looked at the parking lot. She said, "How many of them are there?" Dorothy said, 63. Angela said, "That's a lot of family." Dorothy looked at her. Something moved in her face, the particular movement of a thing that has been compressed for a long time and is found in a single sentence from a young woman in a blue vest, the precise point of release. She did not cry. She was not going to cry at her register, but her voice, when she spoke, was a different voice than the one she had been using all afternoon. She said, "It is." Cole rode home alone. The chapter dispersed the way it had arrived, in formation, deliberate, engines turning one by one until the sound of 63 motorcycles receded down Mill Street and then down Decatur, and then out into the county roads that radiated from Caldwell like spokes, each man carrying the thing he carried toward wherever he was going next. Cole reached his house on Sycamore Street, the same street his mother's house had been on, 2 blocks down, in the house he had bought after she died, because the idea of no one living on that block who remembered her was something he had found he could not accept. And he parked the Road Glide and took his grocery bag inside. He put the kidney beans and the tomatoes in the pot. He browned the beef. He added the spoonful of peanut butter his mother had always added and that he had spent 12 years leaving out, and the kitchen filled with the smell of it, and the kitchen was a room with a purpose again. He called Dorothy at 6. She answered on the second ring. She said she was fine. She said Angela from Lane 3 had brought her a cup of tea at 4 o'clock without being asked. She said Glenda Marsh had come back in, she had forgotten paper towels, and had hugged her at the register, which Dorothy said she had not expected, and which had required a moment to recover from. Cole said, "You should have called me." She said, "I know." He said 3 months, Dorothy, she was quiet for a moment. She said, "I didn't want to make it a big thing." Cole said, "It was already a big thing." She said, "I know that now." He said, "Call me, whatever it is." She said, "All right, Cole." He said, "I mean it." She said, "I know you mean it." A pause. "That chili about done?" He said, "Getting there." She said, "Add a little more cumin than your mother used to." She always went light on the cumin. He said, "She's been gone 6 years and you're still editing her recipe." She said, "She'd want it right." He laughed. It was the laugh of a man who has not laughed in a kitchen in several weeks and finds, with some surprise, that the kitchen is still the right room for it. He said good night. He hung up. He stood at the stove with the wooden spoon in his hand, and outside the window the February dark had settled over Sycamore Street the way it always did. Complete. Cold. Familiar. And the house was the size it was, and the street was quiet. And from 2 blocks down in the direction of his mother's old house, there was nothing but dark and the bare winter trees. But inside, the kitchen smelled of chili and cornbread, and the stove was on, and the spoon was in his hand, and it was Tuesday. It was just Tuesday. And that was enough. If this story reached you, if you believe that nobody should have to stand alone at a register while the world looks at its shoes, Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that family shows up. Hit like. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment. Have you ever watched something like this and stayed silent? What would you have done? Type Iron Cross in the comments if this one got you.